Right, joining me now is John Gower, who is a retired Rear Admiral from the British Navy, and he was also the former Assistant Chief of Defense Staff. Hi, John.
Hello, Dana. Good to see you again.
John, can you tell me the sinking of the Moskva, this Russian flagship craft in the Black Sea? First of all, just as somebody, who has spent a lifetime in the Navy, how significant is this? How big a wow was this in your community?
Well, I think you do not go into a land war expecting to lose the flagship of your sea force on the sea side of the battle. This is not a maritime battle. There has been no direct war between the Russian fleet and any maritime elements of the Ukraine armed forces. And in fact, the deployment of the Moskva, which is quite an elderly ship, it's predominantly a ship against another ship. That's how it was designed. It has a limited shore bombardment ability with its gun on the bow. And it is that gun which it used to bombard Snake Island right at the beginning of the war. I think that the Russians did not expect in any way that their maritime forces would be engaged, and yet we have seen on at least 3 occasions probable engagements and sinkings or damaging of ships, and the most latest of these is the probable sinking by Ukrainian action of the Moskva.
The Pentagon says there's evidence that the Ukrainians sunk it. The Ukrainians say that they fired 2 cruise missiles from the shoreline near Odessa. What's your opinion?
Well, I must say first that I don't, as a retired naval officer, I have no access to any inside scoop or intelligence here. I speak here merely from my experience. And I can bring up, if you like, some pictures that I've prepared, which might help those listening to understand what it is that I'm
Sure.
saying.
Let's have a look at them.
Okay, so this is Moskva. She's a big, impressive ship, but as I say, she was a new ship when I was quite a young officer, so she's been around a bit. We only have the images, so this clearly is an image taken some time ago. We only have the accounts that the Russians have given, which is that she suffered an internal explosion and fire, or fire and then explosion and then loss of the ship. And the Ukrainian version, which, as you say, is backed up by United States intelligence, that there was a cruise missile attack from a shore-based anti-ship cruise missile battery near Odessa, and some reports that a drone was also used, probably as part of the targeting, but also perhaps as part of the distraction of this ship, whose primary role is not anti-air, and so it is primarily an anti-surface ship, and it will not have a very significant anti-air capability.
Does any of that make sense to you, that they may have used a drone or 2 or 3 to distract this ship?
Well, I think that a distraction wouldn't have been the primary objective. It might have occurred that way. They certainly would have wanted to give the missile battery an accurate position of the target ship, because these cruise missiles, the Neptune is a derivative of the Russian, again quite old but very capable kayak missile, the KH-35. And that is a missile that can launch against a position in the sea without any radar on, so it's very difficult to detect. And then when it gets close to the target, it illuminates its radar and then homes in on the target. And if you can present a position by using drones or any other intelligence capability, then you end up by making it a more stealthy approach by the missile, if indeed that is what happened. So this is what she looks side on, and I bring this merely to show the sort of bit that's above the waterline in grey and the bit that's below the waterline in red, which is significant when we look at the photographs that have become available, having been taken from what appears to be the Russian ships which went to her aid, and perhaps the ships which took her under tow after the damage, whether by missile, probable, or by internal explosion, possible. And I'll come to one of those, because this is where we can now start to look at perhaps what happened. So these are the primary two photographs that have been made public. And the first thing I want to draw people's attention to is she has a lot of water inside her at the moment. If you remember the previous photograph, she was standing very proud of the sea. In fact, some of the underwater, the boot topping, the brown bit was visible. And so what she's lost is what in naval term is called freeboard, that bit of the ship that is below above the waterline, the bit that keeps her afloat, the air in the ship that keeps her afloat. And just for perspective, the waterline is nearly up to the break in the hull, where the hull slightly bends. Admittedly, she is heeling over towards the photographer, but if that was, you look at the previous photograph, that would be a rising of the water, where I've marked it in blue, from what you can just see around where the white line is, almost up to the upper deck level. So that is a significant amount of water in the ship. Now, that amount of water is very unlikely to have come simply from firefighting within the ship. Some of it might have done, but the majority of that water has come in through a hole in the hull. Now, that hole in the hull could have been caused by an internal explosion out or by an external attack. In my judgment, it is much more likely to have been by an external attack, because if you have an explosion in a ship, the vent path is usually up through hatches, through a funnel, not out through the hull, which is designed to withstand water pressure and other things. So it's more likely that something was punched into it from the outside. And the reason I say that is, if you look at this photograph here, which is just a zoom in on the one we've looked at, this is the area of greatest damage. So if a missile attack, the missile hit here. These missiles sea skim. In their terminal phase, they go down to about 3 meters, about 10 feet off the water, and they hit generally on the side of the ship. And if you look carefully inside the red circle, you can see what appears to be a hole in the hull. It's a dark mark on the hull. It is unlikely to have caught fire and just burnt that bit of the thing. So it looks like a hole in the hull. I'm speculating, but she's tilted over in that direction. She's lost a lot of freeboard. The chances are that the water has come in from a hole on her port side. And the reason I think this is that my mind, I'm old enough to remember the Falklands War, and my mind goes back to the Exocet attack in early May of 1982 on HMS Sheffield. So this is what Moskva looked like after the incident in April of this year. This is Sheffield after the Exocet attack in May of 1982. And on both of them, the area of the ship that's the biggest cross-section that a missile radar would look at, where the funnel is, where the command and control area is, where the main missile area is, you can see in the Sheffield that the hole from the Exocet missile is about there. Remember, this is a missile basically designed from a missile designed to look like an Exocet. So they're very, very similar missiles. And if you look at the Moskva, there is again this hole that I believe to be on the port side, roughly where the largest radar mass of the ship would be to a missile approaching the ship. And I think these two photographs show a very similar story. And the other thing about the Moskva, which is different from the Sheffield, is that around where the missile struck, just forward of that, are all of the sandbox anti-ship missiles. There's a considerable amount of ammunition and other explosive issue and stuff around there, detonating munitions and all of that kind of stuff.
Do you want to imagine what the first panicked 30 minutes or so were like on that ship after, if it was indeed a missile strike?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to be lurid and imagine it. If you want to know, you can read the Board of Inquiry report into HMS Sheffield's loss. It's a considerable panic is never the right word with trained crews, but undoubtedly a massive shock. There will be initial loss of life, a huge fireball, and then you set to try and save the ship. And Sheffield was saved for a little longer than Moskva. She also sank under tow, but she was in the South Atlantic Ocean, not in the Black Sea. Those are two very different bodies of water.
Let's lose that picture, John, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So, they're saying that the captain of the ship died in this attack. It may be, I mean, he could have died in many different ways, fighting the fire, being there when the ship sunk. He may have died even in the first few seconds of this, because that hit, according to the picture that we're looking at, or we were looking at, in this just below or very close to the command and control, you call that the bridge?
Well, the bridge is where you look out and drive the ship from. That in most modern warships, and I'm sure Moskva is the same, there is an operations room, which is usually down below the bridge. It's usually forward, simply because it needs to be close to where the captain's cabin is, where the bridge is, simply for the positioning of the key officers. You don't put the command and control center right aft because of the time taken to get there. So much like Sheffield, the operations room in Sheffield was very much where it hit. If that was the case, and in most modern navies, when there is a battle underway, the captain is actually in the operations room, not on the bridge. A more junior officer simply steers the ship where the operations room wants it to go. So again, it's speculation. If he was in the ops room and that's where the missile hit, that may well be where he died. Unlikely for the captain to be actually fighting fires. That wouldn't be the primary role of the captain. His job in any circumstances to direct others and maintain an overview. But sadly, a number of the ship's company will have lost their lives in this. I say sadly simply as a mariner. They are, of course, part of the arm of the country that initiated this war. So the sadness is tinged hugely.
Notable that some of them are conscripts, according to the Soldiers' Mothers Committee, who said that they shouldn't have been involved in direct action. But anyway, that's another issue. There were more than 500 sailors on there, and the Russians have not come clean on how many died. But in the awards ceremony, where they handed out medals to survivors, there was only about 100 in the photograph. Would you comment on that? I mean, the loss of life could be quite big. I mean, the entire ship sunk.
The loss of life could be rather big. It's also, I saw a couple of photographs of that ceremony. There did not appear to be any wounded or injured individuals there, and I suspect, therefore, that the difference between casualties and loss of life is a different one. I suspect that if Sheffield's experience and other ships in the Falklands that we have lost, and indeed USS Cole, when she was attacked by terrorists in the Middle East, and a number of people, a larger proportion of people tend to be injured either by fire or by explosion or by other things. So I wouldn't draw the conclusion if you only saw 100 and there were 500 on board that 400 were killed, because I think that would be unusual in a ship that didn't immediately sink and had time to bring support vessels to her and clearly make an evacuation. It's clear from that photograph that while there is considerable damage in the photograph I showed in a particular section of the ship, the remainder of the ship appears to be relatively undamaged. So, I mean, I think there will definitely be deaths on board, but I think to say it's in the hundreds, I think that would be unusual.
You think it's safe to say that it would be in the hundreds?
No, I said if you said in the hundreds, I would find that unusual, given that the ship was still afloat considerably long after the attack, and that it appears to be relatively undamaged elsewhere in the ship. Again, this is all speculation.
It is, John, and unfortunately, we've had to speculate because the Russians want this to go away. But it's obviously a great sense of national pride and a huge black eye to the Russian Navy to lose that ship, because I think in historical terms, whatever Navy you're from, to lose your flagship in a conflict is quite remarkable, is it not? I mean, this, I've covered the Kursk, which was the Russian loss of a submarine. But I mean, this is quite recent and a very large loss to the Russian Navy.
Yes, I mean, you've mentioned the Kursk, and I was going to talk about Kursk because she is significant in the other possible cause of the loss of Moskva. Russia has, or the Soviet Union and Russia, depending on either side of the change of name and status, has had a number of losses of ships and submarines over the decades. The latest significant one was Kursk. Kursk was an entirely self-generated system failure, followed by explosion, followed by loss of all hands and the submarine. They previously, in the mid-1980s, lost a Mike-class submarine off the coast of Norway, which caught fire with very few survivors and sank. Problems with their systems and the manpower mixed between professional and conscripts that man it have dogged the Russian and the Soviet Navy for decades. So that is why I can't exclude, I wouldn't exclude that this was, this could have been an internal accident of a very significant kind. But I think the evidence in the photographs tends to lean far more. And as the US intelligence backs up, perhaps there is other information that's not in the public domain. But I think just an analysis of the photographs shows that if I had to choose, I would say this was as a result of an attack. But we shouldn't rule out the Russian explanation, because it's not as if it would be the first time they'd lost a major ship or submarine through accident.
Look, I know you have a huge amount of expertise in chemical, biological, nuclear, and I just can't let you go without asking you, do you think that this danger of some of the threats from President Putin has eased somewhat? I mean, he hinted at a possible use of a nuclear tactical weapon, and there are great fears of them using chemical weapons as they did in Syria. Do you have reason to, exhale and feel that we're through a more dangerous period now with the Russians, or do you think that that threat is still there, looming, and something we have to really take note of?
I don't exhale with any relief at any stage of this war. As I think I said to you in an earlier interview when we discussed this, the veiled threats, very thinly veiled threats that the president made and some of his senior staff, military and political, made which were couched in terms that made it absolutely clear that if there was intervention by a neighboring state or indeed by NATO, that nuclear weapons were definitely within the field of arms on the table. On the one hand, you could say that intervention has not occurred for a whole host of reasons, mostly because intervention the one thing you can say about any intervention is that the life of the average Ukrainian would become much more dangerous instantly. Even more so than under the callous bombardment of the Russians. And NATO and the US in particular took very great care not to rise to any of the nuclear saber rattling that President Putin undertook at the beginning. And I said in that interview with you that him using a weapon as part of his war against Ukraine, a nuclear weapon, is extremely unlikely. I would never venture to say President Putin would not do ... because every time you try and say that, he then goes and does it. But I think it would be extremely unlikely, because if you wanted to guarantee an intervention, that would be the way to go about it. So whilst I don't exhale with relief, and I don't think anything has changed as a result of the change in strategy in Moscow, where they have moved from trying to take the capital to possibly the original most significant strategic thing for Russia, and that is a land bridge to the illegally annexed Crimea part of Ukraine. I don't think that removes the minimal possibility of these weapons. What I don't think has changed at all, however, is if things are not going the way that the president and the leading apparatchiks in Moscow want it to go, and in particular, if resilience continues to be shown by everyone from President Zelensky down to the civilians whose stoic reaction to the murder of their families we see daily on television, I remain afraid that the predilection of the Russians and President Putin in particular in person to resort to barbaric weapons, chemical weapons and biological weapons in the terrorization of the civilian community, I could not rule that out. I don't think that has changed. And I think the way in which you counter that is to make it absolutely clear, as I've said before, that if those weapons are used, in addition to the countless breaches of international humanitarian law that have already taken place in the Ukraine war, you would assiduously seek out, try and bring to justice all of those in the command chain who were part of the release of those weapons of terror.
John Gower, Rear Admiral, retired from the British Navy. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.